Hello and welcome back to This Week in Triathlon. It's been a busy week, Andres. It's 70.3 World Championship week, and I'm going to make a little bit of a special podcast or webcast just to talk primarily about the 70. That's kind of a tongue twister for me. 70.3 World Championships, a race which you actually participated in.
That's correct, and hello to everybody. And the issue is, I think for you, is that you've been moving apartments quite a bit over the last couple of days, and this one's not equipped with the teleprompter, so we're having to go. We're having to ad lib the entire show, and sometimes it gets a little bit tricky, but I think we'll get it together, huh?
Yeah, I had to lend my teleprompter to Obama. He had to talk about Syria apparently this evening, so I'm without it. And I'm also without a laundry machine. As you can see, I'm actually wearing a bike jersey as a shirt because I'm up in Mammoth Lakes. As some of our viewers have been watching the last few weeks, I'm at a high-altitude camp. This will be my last week up at altitude prior to Ironman Tahoe, so I'm looking forward to actually switching accommodations again tomorrow, where I'll have a little bit better amenities and I can actually wash my clothes and get out of my bike jerseys. Well, it is a comfortable shirt, I have to say.
I was just going to say those are pretty comfy. So if you are going to have to wear a bike jersey, that's not a bad one to be wearing. But like you said a little bit earlier, a couple minutes ago, Vegas 70.3 was last week. I did participate. That's a good way of putting it. It was about that. That's about what I did. I participated. I didn't race too much of it. But from what I could tell, I went back and looked at the webcast yesterday. First and foremost, they did a great job, in my opinion. The guys, I think it was Michael Lovato and Matt Lieto, were the athletes that were commentating, and they did a wonderful job. Greg Welch, I think, is his name. I could do without him and some of his commentary. But regardless, it was fun to watch. It seems to me that 70.3 is just a perfect distance. But why don't we get your thoughts on the race?
Well, I have to be honest. This is actually the first half-distance triathlon I've ever actually watched start to beginning. I had my alarm set to kind of go off so I could sleep in as much as possible. Turn on my computer, bam, the gun went off. And I was able to watch all of the commentary, all of the race footage they had going live. And I was very, very interested in both the women's and the men's field coming into this race. But I have to be honest, I was a little bit more anxious for the men's race, just with the quantity of guys stepping up from the ITU distance this year up to 70.3. I was really anxious to see Bevan Doherty, Olympic bronze medalist and silver medalist, go up against Jan Frodeno, Olympic gold medalist. And just to see how guys like Tim Don, former Hy-Vee winner, Greg Bennett, how they'd all kind of handle it with Sebastian Kienle in the field and Craig Alexander. It was truly a stacked field in both the men's and the women's field. And things kind of materialized a little bit differently than we thought. A lot of the ITU guys actually missed. I don't think anyone really missed the pack of the favorites, but it was very, very strung out. Guys like Josh Amberger and Andy Potts were really stringing that group out from the gun. And when they came out of the water, guys were chasing to kind of bridge up to that gap. But I didn't think they were going to let off the gas, and they didn't. Guys like Timothy O'Donnell were really pushing the pace early. Josh Amberger was pushing the pace early. And the one absence, there were two absences I saw. First was Ivan Vasiliev, probably one of the best swimmers in the field. He was absent, and I can't help but think, Andres, he didn't actually show as actually a starter. And what I heard was the day before the race, one of the pro athletes was actually swimming in Las Vegas outside of the swim boundaries of the swim times, was actually disqualified. And I can only think that was Ivan Vasiliev. I could be wrong, but there was only one pro that didn't start.
I saw the thread about that and on Slow Twitch, and I did see him at the beginning of the race. He was in transition, or he was right outside of transition. So that was the first thing that came to mind as well when I saw that he wasn't shown as a starter, and I had read the Slow Twitch thread on the night before. So what happened is you actually had to have your timing chip in order to be able to do the practice swim in Lake Las Vegas, and I was one of those guys that wasn't staying nearby, and I forgot my timing chip, so I didn't get to practice swim. Not that it would have mattered, but I would have actually liked to have swam in that in that murky lake for 30 minutes at most. And so I didn't get to swim. I heard that there was a pro athlete who had gotten disqualified, and like you said, that was the first thoughts that came into my mind, that Ivan Vasiliev was the guy who had gotten disqualified. But nonetheless, I did see him before the start of the race. He was hanging out in transition, so who knows what the real story is.
And the other absence coming out of the water, Craig Alexander actually wasn't that far back off the lead. He's usually a first pack swimmer. But right away, something was amiss because he wasn't coming up on the results, and they realized something was wrong. It turns out Craig Alexander got a drafting penalty in the first couple miles of the bike course. From what I understand, there was actually a roundabout. Well, you probably hit it yourself. And coming down this hill into the roundabout section, he kind of looked down. An athlete in front of him braked and came within that 10-meter draft zone at the wrong time when a ref was looking at him. Probably wasn't getting too big of a benefit. Any thoughts on that course, kind of the first couple miles? Was it technical, especially in the rain?
Not really. I think the rain makes it tricky, obviously, but the number of athletes going on course. I happen to be towards the end of the most popular time, I guess. I mean, I'm not a fast swimmer by any stretch of the imagination, so by the time I hit it, there was actually very few people out on that part of the course. So I imagine towards the middle of the race and towards the time that most of the athletes are exiting the water and getting onto the bike course, that there was probably a lot more congestion. But I wouldn't call it tricky or technical. It'd just be a matter of how many athletes are there. But the thing that jumps, I think we're not hearing the entire version of the story, because if you look at the area where they loop around, if you've looked at the course, there's actually they come out of the water, they loop around the little resort area, and then they go up about a 1.5 to 2 mile climb, and then they go on to, I think it's called Lake Las Vegas Parkway, or Lake Mead Parkway, I believe is the name, and then they kind of do a little loop around in that area. Riders were bunching up, and even the pros were right behind the others. So I think there's a little bit of room for interpretation in an area like that. If you bunch up, especially if you're coming around a roundabout that's technical, they weren't handing out drafting penalties in that particular area of the course where they were looping around and going underneath the road. So I don't see why it couldn't have been the same sort of leniency towards the athletes after the roundabout. So I think maybe we're not hearing the end of this. I'm not calling Craig Alexander a liar. I think it might have been a little bit more blatant than I looked down and there I was.
Well, as our viewers may or may not know, watching the footage from the 70.3 Worlds or Kona, it is crucial to make that swim pack, and the bike seems to kind of string out, and even within that 10-meter draft zone, I feel like you still get a little bit of a drafting penalty. Some of the referees with USAT would disagree, say there's no drafting benefit. But when you're humming around at 30 miles an hour plus, especially on the downhills, I think there is a benefit of having that pack. Especially just you don't need to pace yourself as much. You don't need to look at your power meter because you know you're with the pack. But I think the pros, especially towards the pointy end of the field, were kind of looking back over their shoulders, and for good reason. Sebastian Kienle didn't come out of the water that far back. He actually had a pretty good swim after some off-season injuries, and had some issues with an Achilles ligament tear early in the season. But he was able to close the gap about 10 miles earlier into the course this year than he did last year. And Josh Amberger, who had gone off the front on his brand new Felt IA bike, he was able to get maybe a 10-15 second advantage. And I thought maybe he was going to have a go to try to break away, and he did get away from the front end. But when they were showing Josh Amberger, they kind of panned to the front. You could tell the motorcycle was getting out of the way of somebody. And then at mile 25, I believe it was, right just before the turnaround, you could see Sebastian Kienle in his nice white and Scott helmet and Scott bike with the zip wheels that were kind of painted in the World Championship colors. And when I saw him pop up, I honestly, my heart rate kind of increased, because that was kind of that's it. When Sebastian Kienle makes his move, that's his point in the race where he just has to go ride hard and try to break everybody. And I think people did try to ride with Sebastian Kienle. Reading some of the testimonials from guys like Joe Gambles and Greg Bennett, they were trying to ride with him. And guys like Joe Gamble's trying to push 350 watts when you're not that big of a guy, and having Sebastian Kienle still push the pace and break off the front. I think guys thought, okay, we can give him a few minutes lead here, and the ITU guys are probably licking their chops, thinking, okay, Sebi gets a 2-3 minute lead. I'm Jan Frodeno. I can run 5-minute pace. I'm used to that kind of a pace, and I'll be comfortable trying to reel him in from there. The problem is the ITU guys all came in. A lot of the guys came in together. Guys like Andy Potts and Bevan Doherty. And Jan Frodeno especially. Jan Frodeno went out, apparently the first mile, Terenzo Bozzoni just had to let these guys go. Jan Frodeno ran the first mile in 4 minutes and 50 seconds, if you can believe it. I'm not sure if that first mile was downhill or uphill or flat, but 450, was that first mile uphill or downhill, or was it?
Well, it's downhill, but actually before we get onto the run, I want to touch on something you said about Sebastian's ride, and I think unlike last year, and I didn't watch the part where he gets to the front because it seemed to me, at least when I was watching the broadcast, that was a time where they had gone to commercial, so the screen was very little in the right corner, and you didn't get to see much, or at least when I was watching it, that's when it seemed that he made it to the front. But I just think that's how this year. That's just the pace that he was riding. He wasn't making a move like he did last year. That was the pace that he was riding, and people just can't keep up with him when he's riding at the pace he wants to ride. And if you read the interview that Timothy Carlson did from Slow Twitch, it's pretty funny because he's pretty candid. He throws a couple of swear words in there, so if you don't like those, I wouldn't recommend you read the article. But he knows how fast he can run after putting that many watts and pushing it on the bike. So he was very comfortable doing that, and he knew that by doing so, he was actually wearing down those guys like Bevan Doherty and like Jan Frodeno, that even though they can run a 108, or at least Frodeno can on a fairly fast course, that they weren't going to be able to after trying to keep up with him, or they were going to be too far back if they didn't try to keep up with him. So that was kind of his strategy. Obviously it worked. But going back to your question, the run course is the worst run course I've ever run in terms of layout. It's just completely boring. But yes, it's either downhill or uphill, and the first mile is probably at a 3% or negative 3% downhill.
Okay. But anyways, Jan Frodeno quickly after the first few miles, pulled the plug, and after Jan Frodeno pulled the plug, I think the pace eased with Terenzo Bozzoni and Andy Potts and Joe Gambles, and from then on, Sebastian Kienle looked great running from the first steps. He ended up having the third fastest run split, ran under 1:15, absolutely amazing for that kind of a course on those conditions, especially after that bike, and came away with the win relatively handily. So it was good to see Terenzo, it was Bozzoni back on form, and Joe Gamble was rounding out the podium there. But I think everyone was surprised. A lot of the ITU guys, the recent ITU converts, had less success than they were kind of hyped they were going to have.
Yeah, and I was one of those guys that thought that they were going to do well. But I think when you have an athlete that has a good race plan and he executes and things go his way, that's just what happens. But yeah, no, I think overall, I was thinking about it on my way home, and I think the 70.3 is just kind of that perfect distance where you can actually watch a race and enjoy it. And it really takes no longer than watching a round of golf on TV if you're into the PGA Tour. I mean, that's about the time it takes for a full round. So it's not like you're dedicating an entire day. And at least in this particular instance, there was plenty of action out of the swim part of the bike, and as things are winding down in the men's side, you get to watch the women's race unfolding, which was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, the women's race, I think we move on from the men. The women's race was actually fascinating as well. I really thought Melissa Hauschildt was the favorite kind of coming into this race, and she clearly dominated this performance. But the cameras, for the most part, were really focusing on Annabelle Luxford, who was pushing the pace all day long. So was Svenja Bosland from Germany, who has a great position. She looks just like Sebastian Kienle, and coincidentally, they both had the same coach. She looked really great on her bike. She also had a similar helmet to I think you were planning to ride. She was wearing that Casco blunt tail road aero helmet. It was pretty cool to see. But throughout the day, Heather Jackson was moving up on the bike. The one move that just never came was Angela Nath, the Las Vegas resident. I thought she was going to be moving up on the bike and making a move to get on the podium here. She's one of the best in the business when she's on form, but unfortunately she had some issues with some asthma apparently. But I was looking for her to make a move. It never came, and that can't bode well for her kind of going into her Ironman debut at Lake Tahoe in 2 weeks. That's one of the most anticipated debuts at the Ironman distance for me at the Ironman distance. And with all the smoke that's in there from the rimfire, that can't bode well for Angela Nath. But anyways, Melissa Hauschildt had a good bike. By the time they hit the T2, it kind of bunched up. And Mel actually took a spill on her Specialized shiv. Apparently, kind of coming into one of the last corners. Apparently, she wiped out, popped back up with Annabelle Luxford and Svenja Bosland. But another absence was Leanda Cave. She was one of the fastest swimmers, along with Annabelle Luxford, the defending champion. But Leanda Cave apparently just doesn't have the form she quite had last year. Maybe she's building still in Kona. I think that's the case. I think she's still going to be one of the favorites going into Kona. But she did not have quite the race she was planning on. Was actually finished outside the top 10. So not a good day for Leanda Cave.
Yeah, and I heard about Melissa Hauschildt and her fall, and I don't know exactly where it happened, but I'm trying to think of where it could have happened. I know it was towards the end of the race, and there really weren't any technical corners, even with the rain and the wet conditions. So I'm curious to find out, not that I will, but what happened and how that maybe she got a little bit careless or hit a cone or something, but there weren't really any technical right-hand turns or corners, and which was how she fell down. If you look at her bike, the right side, the derailleur side, was the side that took the spill. But obviously it wasn't serious enough. I heard some of the other women commenting about it, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but they said that they'd never seen somebody pop up so quickly and get back on the bike. Angela Nath, that was kind of my pick. I didn't really make picks, but somebody who I thought was going to do really well. She must have had a severe case of asthma or something, because I don't bike faster than Angela Nath, and I did. So something must have gone wrong. She's a tremendous cyclist, and she didn't post a fast split by any stretch of the imagination. In regards to the women's race, I think a lot of people would like to see more of it. I certainly think that it oftentimes it's more exciting than the men's. But having raced the course, it would have been impossible for them to get a pretty good amount of coverage, because that run course just was completely crowded. And by the time they're running, especially on their second and third lap, I mean, there was just a ton of people out there.
Yeah, it was interesting to see. Sebastian Kienle ended up kind of lapping their Annabelle Luxford, and to see them kind of running together for a while was pretty interesting. Annabelle Luxford was kind of the revelation to me. I know she's a very good swimmer. She comes from an ITU background. I've swam in the same lane as her. She's an extremely quick swimmer, great mechanics, very strong athlete, and she just hung tough on the run all day long and just would not go away. She's not the best runner in the sport by any means, but it took a while for Heather Jackson to kind of reel her in at the end, and good for Heather Jackson, one of the best runners in the sport now. She's previously known as being a great cyclist, but her run is really lights out now. But Mel Hauschildt, I have to be honest, they were commenting on her run mechanics, and she does look good running, but she looks good running kind of like Michael Raylert looks good running. They both have terrible mechanics. Like, traditionally speaking, Mel Hauschildt has a lot of vertical displacement. She's really bouncy. She was a great steeplechaser from Australia, and she's a great runner, but I think it comes more from her aerobic capacity than her actual stride mechanics, because there's a lot going on with her body. She's up and down. She's really bouncing, and I really don't see that translating well to the Ironman distance. I really don't. I think someone like Rinny or Miranda Carfrae, who has probably the best mechanics in the sport, just from that turnover perspective, They're kind of similar along those lines, just really powerful stride. But Rennie just has so much better mechanics than Mel Hauschildt. But obviously she's a great runner because she was the fastest split of the day.
But that makes me wonder. Do you think then they say that she's a great runner, she looks great running because of what they're seeing her paces? I mean, is it a result of how fast she's running versus how she? I mean, if there was no indication of how fast she was going, would they still say the same thing?
No, I don't think they would. They wouldn't at all. Same with Michael Raylard.
So
look at Michael Raylard. He's all over the place. He's compressing his torso, and he actually gets injured. And he hasn't had a very successful Ironman career because you can't afford to be wasting that kind of energy when you're racing for 8 hours versus 4 hours. So she can get away with it. I'm really curious to see if she ever makes the step up to Ironman, if that kind of run kind of converts over.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, you hear them say she looks great running, but she looks great because she's going fast, and it's not necessarily a reflection of her mechanics. So that's interesting coming from you, who's obviously a strong runner. But you mentioned her making the move to Ironman if she decides to do it, and I think 70.3. I could just see this distance become more and more popular and more prestigious to the point where perhaps the prize money becomes just as deep as Kona's prize money. Certainly, the talent and the level of competition, both on the men's and women's side, was exciting, and I think will continue to be as soon as you're getting the influx from ITU athletes, and which I think will turn into more popularity for this distance.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting, all the hype kind of coming into this race with all the ITU athletes, and they were saying, the speed that Tim Don has, he's apparently a 3:47 1500 runner or 3:37, and I saw that and I just thought, I really don't care how fast this guy can run a 1500. 1500 is under 4 minutes in length, and we're talking about a race that's 4 hours long. And last week on the show, I mentioned there's a lot of guys that had a lot of success. Back in the 90s, you look at people like Mark Allen or Simon Lessing. Those are two good examples of guys that excelled at the shorter distances. One, Mark Allen, was able to have a successful long distance career, but Simon Lessing kind of struggled, to be honest. And I think that a lot of the ITU guys, maybe 1 out of 6. That kind of move up to the distance will really have profound success, in my opinion. I mean, they all can't convert it. The races are twice as long as what they're used to. The runs are different, swims are different. The ride, obviously, the dynamics change a lot with the drafting versus non-drafting. So, it was very interesting to see. And I think on last week's show we mentioned that part of the fun with the 70.3 and the Ironman is that occasionally those super bikers come along like Sebastian Kienle that can just take a stick of dynamite and just throw it right in the middle of the race and let the cards fall where they may, and let the strongest guy, the fastest guy across the finish line is going to be the victor. So for both men's and women, I think this is pretty exciting racing. It's a good style of racing. It's certainly more tolerable than Ironman. I honestly, Andreas, I didn't get out of bed for 4 hours. I woke up at 6:30. I watched this thing. I had my long run on Sunday, and if this was an Ironman, there's no way I could stay in bed for 8-9 hours to watch this thing. So thank God it was over in under 4 hours, so I could get on with my day. So it's more tolerable, more palatable for sure.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's no different than perhaps even an NFL game that goes into overtime, or even not going into overtime. A lot of these NFL games are becoming 4-hour events, and so I definitely agree with you. And what I took away from the coverage was, you can do a little bit of quote unquote pregame and still kind of keep it around a tolerable time. So I look forward to this becoming a more popular distance, and who knows, maybe it'll become the marquee triathlon distance, and you'll start seeing coverage similar to that of the ITU. I think as we do with our regular This Week in Triathlon shows, and tell me if you want to talk about the other races that were this weekend, but there was certainly some tech displayed at the World Championships, and I don't know what you noticed, but I noticed a few things that maybe we can talk about.
Yeah, well, I think you could probably give a better perspective because you were kind of the boots on the ground over the weekend. But there were a couple of trends I saw that were interesting to me. Recently, there was a new service down in Carson, just outside of LA, called Aerosports. It's a velodrome testing service. It's kind of like a wind tunnel, but it's on a velodrome because it can measure aerodynamics and drag and watts and all that. And a lot of the athletes that have been down there kind of have adopted similar setups on the bike, if you will. So I noticed that the X-Lab Torpedo 400 mount, which I've talked to you about a few times, that was on the bike of Luke McKenzie. It was on the bike of Craig Alexander. And just about every athlete that's been to Aerosports, I think, has that front hydration system. Apparently, it's very aerodynamic. It puts the computer right in front of your face. So that was interesting to me. And what stood out for you?
Well, one question is, I mean, I hear this trend with the XLab, but I think those are just guys that are sponsored by XLab. I don't really see how it's any different than just putting a bottle in between your arms. I mean, a bottle in between your arms is essentially a bottle in between your arms. The computer is nice and high up on top of it, but there's other places where you could put it. So I can't say. And maybe somebody from XLab when we're in Kona. I think you've been speaking with Candace and going back and forth about this particular product, but I think those are just folks that are sponsored by the company. I just can't see there's too much of a difference between one bottle in between the aero bars and another.
Well, it's interesting because I've tried just about everything. Sadly, my wife would agree that I'm kind of a gear a file, if you will. I own just about every, from Tour Hands 20 to Tour Hands 30 to the best from Profile Design and XLab. And I really like the Tour Hands product. Sadly, it doesn't really work too well with my Specialized Shiv. But I got a chance to try out this XLab Torpedo when I was in Boulder. Rebecca Keaton, Didi Griesbauer had them sent from XLab. And the shape of it actually just fits. I know it sounds funny, but it fits very well. It's actually a pretty long bottle. It's very narrow. And it fits, if your elbows are pretty close together, it fills in the gap seamlessly. There's no straws that stick up. And it has kind of a camtail shape on the back. And not all between the arms bottles are equal. I can tell you that for sure because I've done some testing myself. I actually I'm kind of a dork in that I took a 2-liter pop bottle once and actually duct taped it to my frame to see if having an even bigger bottle shape would actually help steer air around the chest cavity, and found that it slowed me down actually considerably. So it's kind of interesting to see what kind of goes into it, and setups. I'm always interested to see how people set up their bikes, and sometimes it's kind of a horror show with people taping bananas to their top tubes, even pros doing that. So it's kind of funny to see some of the best in the sport, still resorting to tapering gels to their top tubes and their handlebars, and it's kind of funny to see.
Well, you asked me what I noticed, and the thing that jumped out the most was the number of air attacks and road type helmets that are also aerodynamics, or that are also aerodynamic, as the Casco that you mentioned. I saw a lot of those, not necessarily the Cascos, but I saw a ton of air attacks, and I think partly because the race is supposed to be hot, and those are helmets that are a lot better ventilated than say a Casque Bambino. And a lot of people traveling from afar don't really have the flexibility to pack 2 helmets. I happen to pack 2 helmets, and it ended up working out real well because I ended up going with the Casque Bambino. I mean, it was completely raining and the temperature was actually quite nice. But that was one of the things that I noticed was the helmet choice of a lot of folks. And also on the pro side, Specialized seem to have a special paint scheme for their sponsored athletes. I think Jan Frodeno, Craig Alexander, Lisa Norden, they were all in this kind of retro-looking Specialized Shiv TT that I actually quite liked. It actually looked really nice. But some of the guys that were Zip sponsored and Specialized sponsor is the ones that I noticed the most, but they seem to have that new aero bar that Zip came out with, where you can actually tilt the armrests, and they seem to be actually rocking the straight extensions tilted upwards a little bit, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I only saw it on a couple of shivs, but that was quite a coincidental that it was on the shivs and it was the zip extension. So I think Jan Frodeno, Lisa Norden were a couple of those guys, but aside from that, lots of expensive equipment. I mean, you could make out of there with $1 million worth of equipment, quite easily. Just pick your row.
Yeah, it is funny. I think people, especially when they make it to the World Championships, kind of they take the gloves off and pull out the credit card, and it's easy to spend a lot of money when you're going to Kona or you're going to Las Vegas, just because you can justify the expense because it's not something you get to do very often. So it's always fun to see some interesting gear. But I think we do have to move on. There were a couple of interesting races last weekend aside from Las Vegas. People texted me throughout the day. They were wondering what was going on with Marinda Carfer. They were wondering, is she injured? And I said, no, she's racing in Muskoka 70.3, a race she won over the weekend. I think Muskoka is a pretty tough course because the times are pretty slow. Marinda won that race relatively handily. But the men's race, Andreas Raelert was in the field, and I obviously expected him to clearly win that race because I didn't recognize any of the other pro men's names really. And we're so close to Kona, I figured he'd be fit. But he actually got trounced by a Canadian named Lionel Sanders. Not Colonel Sanders of KSC, but Lionel Sanders, who apparently is a pretty well-known good runner, and apparently had some substance abuse problems up until just a couple of years ago. Apparently tried to commit suicide a couple of years ago. And has actually, pulled his life together, gotten his training in line, and ran a 1:10 half marathon split, which is pretty astounding, and beat Andreas Raelert, one of the best in the world record holder at the iron distance, by 6.5 minutes. Is this a guy we could be seeing next year throwing his hat in the ring at 70.3, you think, Kona? At Las Vegas? Or, I'm sorry, Mont Tremblant, Andreas?
That's a good question, and you said his name a couple seconds ago, and I already forgot what his name is. No, but I'm just kidding. Lionel Sanders. I don't know. I mean, it's a weird sport. Like you said, it was a race that nobody was paying attention to, that where the talent really wasn't necessarily top notch, and who knows what Raylert's intentions were of racing, or how he's feeling, or what XYZ is. So could he be a threat? I'm sure. Will he? I guess we'll have to check in on This Week in Triathlon in 2014.
Absolutely. I know we'll still be around. Hopefully I'm not still in Mammoth, and hopefully I'm not still wearing a bike jersey.
That would be pretty funny, actually, if you were in that exact same position. You would probably not be married anymore, that's for sure.
That's for sure, and I don't think I would get Winston either. Anyways, moving on to the great state of Wisconsin, I was really happy to see Mikey Twelsiek, former Commerce Bank team member, have some success. It's kind of been a dry spell for him the last 12 months or so, and he's back on form. Had a really cool race top. His wife, Hillary Biscay, started a company called Smash Fest Clothing, and had probably one of the more interesting tri-kits I've seen. They make some pretty cool, funky designs for cycling and triathlon apparel. So Smash Fest, I think they make some cool stuff. Maybe check them out online. But Mikey pulled away from that race, won pretty handily, had a great bike split. And the other guys, Romain Guillaume, top 5, was really the only notable name. Josh Ricks from Australia, also in 4th place. I think Romain Guillaume is he's on the start list at Ironman Tahoe in 2 weeks. We'll see if he actually shows up. And on the women's side, I think some of the top women are kind of shutting it down and racing either Las Vegas or getting ready for Kona. But congratulations to Jackie Arndt there. Sub 10 hours on that course for a woman is pretty good. That's a tough course, and especially the bike course. So good on them. That's one of my favorite events. Great crowd support there in Madison, and that's a wrap up for IMU. I think it's referred to IMU.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that she had won. Jackie, I met Jackie maybe 3 years ago, if not longer. I think it was her first year as a professional triathlete, and she had come to Tribe Multisport, the store that I used to manage a few years back in Scottsdale, Arizona, as part of Team Timex and a Newton clinic slash Timex night event that we had, and she was she was quite young and real eager to take on the professional ranks. So I'm happy that she finally got her first win at the Ironman distance. And second place was actually somebody else that I like and that I know, Best Shot. She had a pretty great performance, even though she does not like Ironman distance, which is pretty funny that you don't like a distance yet you show up to a race and finish second. But congrats to those two, and yeah, I mean it's actually kind of a shame that a race such as Ironman Wisconsin, I mean, it's one of those that's been around for a while, that's popular, that a lot of people like, that it's just kind of gone to the back burner of people's, or at least the pro triathlete's schedule because of the timing.
Absolutely. It is one of the best races in North America, if not the world, especially with the crowd support. The courses are fantastic. The swim in Lake Monona is great. The bike course, you get to see what all the dairy roads are like just west of Madison. It's really epic. And the run is a multi-loop course in the capital of the state of Wisconsin. So, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of races to be found around the calendar. And there are a lot of age groupers that this race usually does sell out. It's a fantastic race, particularly for athletes in the Midwest where they don't have a very long triathlon season. But actually, a gentleman I know by the name of Nathan Strudel, a guy I went to college with, did race. It was his first Ironman. And he posted a question today on Facebook asking, what do you guys think about getting the Ironman tattoo? And I'm happy to talk about this question because it's very it's one that's going to be polarized. I think some people feel passionately one way or the other. But Nathan, you did your first Ironman, and you're wondering if you should go get the tattoo. Andres, I'm going to let you take the first kick at the can before I go off here. Go ahead.
Well, I can only answer the way I would do myself or treat myself, and that's absolutely not. First off, I'm very picky. If I were to ever get a tattoo, I'd probably have to think about it for 30 years, and then I'd probably change my mind. But absolutely not. I'd never get a Ironman tattoo. At least not the typical in the calf, left calf, or right calf, whatever it is. No thanks. Absolutely not. Not even with a gun to my head.
Well, I have to be honest. I can only think of two companies that I know of that people actually tattoo their logos onto their bodies. The first being Harley Davidson. You see a lot of bikers tattooing Harley Davidson. The second is Ironman. When you think about it, WTC has a trademark to that logo. It is a trademarked logo. And I think it's kind of ridiculous, World Triathlon Corporation, maybe in 10, 15 years, maybe Challenge kind of takes over and it's a different logo and you're stuck with this IM for the rest of your life on your calf or on your bicep or what have you. I think it's definitely more common in the age group fields. I think a lot of people kind of check that box off in their life. It's a big accomplishment. It is a big accomplishment doing an Ironman. Not a lot of people do it. And I understand the pride, but the tattoo, it's something you have with you for the rest of your life. I think some people just get maybe just to brag or just maybe a conversation piece. I don't think I should be giving fashion tips as I sit here in my bike jersey. I think the only maybe sporting event tattoo I'd ever get is if I ever went to the Olympics, which I probably will never make unless I somehow join the bobsled team. Maybe the Olympic rings. I think Jan Frodeno has the Olympic rings. I think that actually looks pretty cool. But that's about it. No M. Dot will be going on this man's calf, that's for sure. So Nathan, I think we're going to have to part ways as friends if you get that tattoo, my buddy.
And that's funny. We both agree on it, and like you said, it seems to be. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a pro triathlete with an Ironman tattoo. It just seems to be sort of that bucket list athlete mentality, which is totally cool. If somebody wants to do it, they can. They have every right to. It's their body. They decide what to do, and if they want to give more publicity to Ironman and more exposure to it, more power to them. I think it speaks volumes of the brand, like you said. But I would never do it myself. And yeah, I mean, that's all I'm going to say about that.
But, talking about Harley Davidson and Ironman, those are both kind of lifestyles. There is kind of a biker lifestyle. People really get into their biking, and I know triathletes really get into their triathlon. So, I can understand why some of those people really get into it, might want to do it, but not this guy, that's for sure. So,
I actually for Vineman, there's a company that you can get number tattoos. So you don't actually have to sit in line and wait for the body markers to put the numbers on your arms. And for Vineman, I did I ordered my number once I found out what it was, and I figured I'd put it on before I went to the race, since I drove about an hour and a half to the event on race morning. And part of what they send you is these Ironman temporary tattoos. And I thought about a couple of interesting places where I could have placed those and taken pictures of. And I think it would have been pretty funny to have a little tramp stamp Ironman tattoo for a couple of days.
Tramp stamp, or just do the Mike Tyson. Do the Mike Tyson right on like the side of your face.
Yeah. So I still have them around somewhere. I can't say I've scrapped the idea completely, but it'd be funny to fool a couple of people and pretend that it's a real tattoo and put it in a real funny place.
Okay, well, without further ado, it was a great championship week. We are going to be going live from Kona in just a couple weeks. Andreas and I are both making vacations out of it. We will be coming to you live from the course, tweeting live, posting on Facebook, and also taking a lot of videos, so tune in for that. But that's all for this week in triathlon. Andreas, thanks for a good show.
Thank you, Kevin, and absolutely stay tuned for Kona. We're going to have something to give away for folks who like our show and who come see us. We're still trying to determine what it is, but we will have something. So make sure you go to facebook.com/thisweekintriathlon. Keep up to date and participate, ask questions, and yeah, we'll see you there.
Okay. See you next week.